Hello and welcome to the CAPE podcast. CAPE standing for the Child Abuse Prevention and Education Podcast. My name is Kristi McVie and I am an ex-West Australian police officer who spent 10 years with the police where I was trained as a specialist child interviewer and a child abuse detective. This podcast is all about sharing what I learnt, saw and knew whilst investigating child sexual abuse in the police force. It is also about sharing the knowledge that I gained in that time that helped me with my own parenting of my then 2-year-old daughter. My mission is to help share my knowledge and to help you in your role as parents to keep your kids safe, along with guest experts in the field of child abuse prevention and education, both in person and online. Thank you so much for joining in on the fight to prevent child sexual abuse. Your kids will thank you for it. Hello and welcome back to another episode of the CAPE podcast. I've had a really busy week this week. In actual fact, guys, I just found out that I knew about it. It's been a couple of months in the running, but I'm actually in the Take 5 magazine today. So it's from the July 11. If you let me know if you actually see me in there. I was interviewed a few weeks ago and I forgot all about it. And then someone rang me and said, "You're in the magazine." And I thought, who buys magazines anymore? So I had to go out and buy it. Yeah, so I've had a busy week, but today I'm with Deb Aldrick. Deb and I connected via LinkedIn. Now, I talk about online safety for kids and stuff, and I always say that there's so many amazing things about being online, and one of those is that you get to connect with like-minded people like Deb, and Deb and I connected over our prevention work and our advocacy for child sexual abuse. And Deb and I are going to talk about intra-familial child sexual abuse today, which Deb has amazing resources and a book about. So Deb, thank you so much for being with me today and for having a chat with me. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Kristi. Thank you for having me on. I appreciate the time too.
Well, it's just so interesting when I put that call out. So I put a call out on LinkedIn and I got such an amazing response from so many people because I know lots of people in this industry, but I still don't know everyone, and everyone has their own little experiences and wisdoms and things that come from all different lives. And so it's always interesting when I meet someone who's, coming from a different perspective than mine, or, coming from a same perspective, but different experience. So thank you. All right, Deb. So you're here to talk about intrafamilial child sexual abuse. Can you just very briefly, or as best you can, explain what intrafamilial abuse is? Okay.
So intrafamilial abuse is it's really the thing that we don't talk about a lot. It's taboo. People don't want to hear about it. It's the abuse that happens within the family. It could be sibling on sibling. It could be an uncle who abuses his nephew. It could be a grandparent abusing a grandchild, father, stepfather, anybody who's considered to be a family member.
Yep.
And as I said, it's kept hidden. We don't talk about it. Nobody wants to hear about it. Back in the day, incest was, just a terrible, horrible word. Nobody wanted to say it. Intrafamilial abuse is similar. I think incest is more of
a different generation.
I think it is. I think it's more penetration, where intrafamilial abuse can be touching, can be having the person do things to the child or have them do stuff to the child. I don't think so intrafamilial is what I'm talking about. It's what I've written about in my book. As you mentioned, I'm a survivor. I'm an adult survivor of intrafamilial abuse. And I got to a point in my life where I'd seen it, not just for my own, what happened to me, but in extended family, friends, people I met, and I just kind of had a gutful. And I just, with my own circumstances to being silenced my whole life, not being able to talk about it or get help from my family, and internalizing my pain and trauma, which is what I did. A lot of people externalize with, being promiscuous, becoming an exotic dancer, alcohol, drugs, addictions, whatever. I internalized all my stuff. So I was the people pleaser. I would just always be the person who did everything people told me to do, kept quiet. I struggled with anxiety my whole life. Depression, not so much, more anxiety, just being that Energizer bunny that would just go and go and go, because to stop would be have you'd have to stop and think about what happened to you. So because I was silenced and told not to speak about it, you know, and the control and manipulation from those people who are from your, you know, your family, the first people that you grew up with. Not only my abuser had control over me, but who I used to think of as my safe person growing up. That they were the person that, you know, I thought would never hurt me or let me get hurt. But these days I call them my supposed protector, and I talk about that all through my book. I don't name these people.
Yeah.
I talk about them in those terms. But just the control that both these people had over me from a very young age. And I was very vulnerable. I was an easygoing little girl. I was happy. I was confident until I wasn't. Until all this, you know,
all happened.
Trauma set in. And my abuse, from my memory, and I have got a very good memory, and a lot of my memory comes from the humiliation of what this person did to me and said to me. I'm sure there's a lot of stuff I've blocked out. I'm sure there's a lot of stuff I saw as day-to-day normal stuff. So it didn't, you know, stay in my memory. But the humiliation was the worst part, and it has affected my whole life.
Yeah, and humiliation has you know, as we know, when you're a child, and especially as you're developing, humiliation makes you like literally shrink into yourself and become less, because you're too scared to stick your head out and be seen, because you get humiliated when you do.
Yeah. And I do speak about that in some of my blogs, how I didn't want to draw attention to myself, and the fact that, you know, when you're a child who's been abused and not gotten help, you know, when you go to school, it's like you've got a red flashing light over the top of your head. Bullies can, you know, see you as this vulnerable person. So for me, my home life wasn't safe. My school life wasn't. I didn't really feel safe anywhere. And my stress system, you know, it was oversense, or you know, early life abuse sensitizes our stress systems, and it rewires our hormonal systems to become either hyperactive or oversensitive, which just continues into our later lives. So somebody who might go for a job interview, say, and you know, it's not that big a deal, whereas somebody like myself who's been through that sort of trauma, everything's just overreactive.
Well, everything's bigger than what, like, your system doesn't know how to be calm. So it just becomes like this massive experience which you can't enjoy, and it's overwhelming. So I can totally relate. Everything you're speaking, I can totally relate. So with regards to your story, and we'll obviously want to respect that you don't name them at all, without going into too much detail as well. But so your abuse was happening by someone in the family who was from what age, and when did you first speak up, or try to, should I say?
Yeah. So from my memory, it was between 4 and 14. It was definitely before I went to school. And I remember something I remember at school, I know things were going on before then. So I did start school about 5.5. I lived on the Northern Beaches down in Sydney, had to be born before the 30th of July to start the school year. I had to wait till I was about 5.5 to start school. So it could have been somewhere between 4 and 5, but I do remember it did happen before then. I told my supposed protector when I was about 10 years old, and I thought couldn't quite remember the conversation, but it wasn't until I was in my 40s and decided to cut my abuser out of my life that I spoke to my dad about what had happened. He'd never been told. So my supposed protector never told my dad.
Yeah, right.
And that's a huge mistake, because I think that could have changed my whole life. If my dad had known what this person was doing to me, things would have been different.
I'd imagine if you know, it, as you were mentioning earlier, like with intra-familial, it could be anyone in the family, and we know that a large percentage of child sexual abuse is by family members, and people known, like over 90% is people known to the abuse. And in fact, when I was investigating these cases, you know, it was a very large portion was family.
Yeah.
A way bigger portion than any other. And so when people say to me, oh, I can trust people. And even when I became a police officer and started learning about this stuff, I was like looking at my own family going, who can I trust, with my daughter? And it's none of their fault. And no, so far nothing has happened. But at the same time, it made me reassess and made me more wary. So that's through my experiences. And I obviously am a protective parent, but it's very normal. And what you're telling me is very not normal, because I don't think not being protective is normal, but it's very reminiscent of the times that you grew up. That people just went, don't want to deal with it, not gonna address it, not gonna do anything.
I've got a chapter in my book called the snow globe effect. Ooh. And I relate it to being trapped in a snow globe as a kid. Where are you going to go? Who are you going to talk to? If you do find your voice, which a lot of us didn't, if you do find your voice and that person doesn't help you, they minimize the situation, they don't make it significant, then you're not going to speak up again. No. And they may be, as you mentioned, it's the times. Mine happened in the 70s and 80s. And who was this person going to tell? Like, they took me to a psychologist once. They had my abusers sitting in the waiting room. I didn't even really know what was going on with me at that point in my life, to tell you the truth, to be able to speak to someone about it.
Yeah.
But my supposed protector saw somebody they knew who worked at this psychologist office, and they never took me back because of, obviously they didn't want people to know. So this is what happens to victims. We, in the family, we are the ones who have to suck it up. We don't get the help and healing that anybody who would be abused by a non-family member would have got at that time in their life. And I was left to dangle in the wind my whole life, fix myself. And almost every decade, like into my 20s, 30s, 40s, I've tried to speak to this person, not my abuser, my supposed protector, about what happened to me. And they didn't want to hear about it. They didn't want to know, whether it was through guilt, shame, whatever. So they silenced me every time I spoke about it. And then I went back into this shell of, well, was it that important? Was it that significant? Well, it must be, because I've had so many detrimental things happen to me during my life, my health, my relationships, my overprotectiveness of my own children, my not feeling worthy as a friend, people pleasing, as I mentioned before, not feeling good enough until I got external validation from people. These are all, things, responses that we go through. And so I've been to lots of psychologists. I got a little bit of help here and there. You don't gel with everyone. I'm not saying that they're not the right thing to do. They're absolutely the right thing to do. But it got to the stage where I was in my early 40s and my abuser's birthday was coming up. And, you've got to understand that I was still participating in family gatherings, birthdays, weddings, everything, just like nothing had happened, just to keep the peace in the family, sucking it up so everyone else didn't have to deal with it. And it was close to their birthday, and I was saying to my psychologist, I just don't want to contact them. I don't want to ring them. And she said to me, one of the most important things in my healing journey, and, I did hear on one of your podcasts about healing and do we ever really heal? And I agree, we don't fully heal, but we can get to a certain point in our life where we're in a better place.
Yeah.
But she said to me, Deb, you don't have to see your abuser. You know that, don't you? And I looked at her and went, what? What do you mean? Like, how am I going to navigate that? And then I let it sink in, and I went, you know what? It's going to blow up my whole family, but it's my time. And I can't keep pushing this stuff down any longer. It's making me sick. It's so detrimental to my mental and physical health, my relationships with my family. They shouldn't have to put up with, all the stuff that I've had to deal with. So I did. I sat my mum and dad down and I said what had happened. And my dad went white as a ghost because just all the blood just drained out of his face. He didn't know, he wasn't told, and he was so angry. So that's how I came about, getting away from my abuser when I was 44 years old. I stayed and put up with it for that long. Yeah. And one of the biggest messages I have in my book is that I want people to read my book, and I write from survivor to survivor. I write it in a really conversational tone. I've got poems throughout it that, people can relate to because there's my turmoil that I'm, addressing through these poems. But what I want to get through to people is that you don't have to stay in the situations. You wouldn't put up with this type of abuse or, from people that weren't your family members. So why should you put up with it from the people who's supposed to love you the most in your life and treat you with the most respect? Why should you have to put up with this from those people?
You shouldn't.
And if they can't, if they can't respect your boundaries, then, maybe you just have to move away from them.
Yeah.
And if that's the only thing to give you a bit of peace in your life, which is the only way I found to do that. And I also don't see my supposed protector anymore. And I had to make that really, really difficult decision, which I'm trauma bonded in a way to this person because, as I mentioned, they were supposed to be my safe person. And I don't know if you've ever heard of Sinead O'Connor's trauma bonding with her mum.
No, tell us about it. I'm sure people
really
listening haven't heard it either. But please explain it, because I hear that term used and I do kind of understand the concept of it. I think I have a bit of a trauma bond with at least someone in my family, but it does, once you realize that that's what it is, it's easier to let it go.
Yeah. So Sinead O'Connor was physically and sexually abused by her mum, which is quite unusual being a woman. We all hear about the men being abused, but it does happen. Yeah, it does happen. And she actually, of course, she became really well known for Nothing Compares to You, that fantastic song, I think back in the 80s or 90s. But she actually brought to the forefront the Catholic Church abuse. She's Irish, and she started to get big with her music career. And she actually ripped up a picture of the Pope at the time live on Saturday Night Live. And that was a big hoo-ha. And oh my God, everyone turned against her. But what she was trying to do is what we're all trying to do at the moment, is bring this. But she was just outcasted for doing that at the time. And she suffered in her career. But what she says, and I write a little bit about this in my book also, is that her music was her safe and healing place. That was the way she could get out of her all the abuse that she happened with her. And if you ever watch, which I suggest people do if they are listening, watch the Dr. Phil interview with Sinead O'Connor. I don't know, it's about, I don't know how many years ago, but there will only be one as far as I know. And it just shows her flipping and flopping between how much she loved her mum and how much she's so glad she's dead. And, and then she'll go back into crying about how much she can't wait to see her mum in heaven, to that she ran a torture chamber and that, Sinead ran away at a certain point in time. Their father left them. I think there's about 4 of them, Sinead and her brothers and sisters. And she just talks about how her mum ran a torture chamber and that everyone else would be really excited for school holidays, but she would just dread it because she'd be at home, with her mother the whole time. And trauma bonding comes about when the person you see as your safe person growing up, you look for them for comfort, but they're also your abuser. So is this confusion in your mind between, well, this person is abusing me, but they're also comforting me. And it's just a horrible reality really to be in. And when you're little, you don't understand what that means either. And if you've grown up with abuse as being normal, you think that is normal. You think that that's, this, you think in a way it's love, but it's not. It's that person either not protecting you or abusing you. So you can be trauma bonded to either your abuser or your protector, supposed protector.
Yeah, and I can see that in a lot of cases I didn't know that word back when I was investigating. It's really, I've only just started hearing that word in the last few years, or that phrase, but I can see that in a lot of cases where, especially because not all abuse is violent or painful either. Sometimes there's grooming involved and there's, and sometimes, there's pleasure involved. It's such a complicated mental game, abuse.
Yeah, absolutely.
it's not all cut and dry. It doesn't all make
No.
sense in the brain, and so the trauma bonding is, you can be trauma bonded, like you said, to your abuser or to people who are meant to be protecting you, who you think that will do and keep you safe, but they don't. But
Yeah.
and the familial stuff, I mean, I have some experience in, like, want of a better word, ghosting family members, because I couldn't deal with, that side of it where you were guilt and shamed and blamed for anything that went wrong.
Yeah.
Even though it wasn't
Yeah.
your fault. You were a child.
Yeah. I've got a chapter called The Invisible Perpetrator and the $1 Million Question. And part of that came about by the $1 Million Question. I'll start with that. That came about by my adult son saying to me, why did you still see this person for so long if they did that to you? And that's a really important question, because I know other people have been abused, and the external family member ostracizes them and says to them, oh, you couldn't have been abused because you stayed around this person. You've interacted with them. How could this possibly have taken place?
Yeah.
But we do, because we don't want to lose contact with other family members. We may be trauma bonded. We have such low self-esteem and lack of confidence that, we stay in these situations.
Yeah, so true.
And the invisible perpetrators, my book called Circling the Wagons, and it took a long time to me to find exactly the right name for this book, and to even stop doubting myself of, why would anyone want to read your story? It's not that interesting. So it wasn't until I came about with the name Circling the Wagons, and that comes from back in the 1800s, when people would, the settlers would travel from the east coast to the west coast of America, and at night, or if they were under attack, they'd circle their wagons, and that they'd all be in the middle of them to protect themselves from attack. And my metaphor with the family abuse is the family circles the wagons around the secret, because they're so ashamed of the secret. They don't want, people to know about what's happened. But in turn, when they're circling wagons around the secret, they're also protecting the perpetrator. So this is why they become invisible and nothing happens.
Yeah.
And as the victims, we're on the outside of these wagons. So that's how I came about with the name Circling the Wagons for my book, because I came to realize over the years, talking to other people, seeing my own circumstances, it happens. This is what happens to everybody.
Wow.
And that's what I talk about in this chapter about the invisible perpetrator. And the fact that they also use our trauma responses, our negative behaviors, our toxic behaviors against us to discredit anything we say. Oh, how can you believe her? She's a stripper. How can you believe him? He's in jail. They're always in toxic relationships. Why would you believe a word they said?
Yeah.
And it works. It works.
It does.
Because,
it really does.
Yeah, because they most people, and this is also why I'm on this big bandwagon to educate people about this topic. And not a lot of people are talking about intrafamilial. I just did a blog about The Last Sleeping Giant, and we've talked about Me Too. We've talked about stranger danger, institutional abuse, church abuse, but nobody wants to speak about the intrafamilial abuse. And I've just got to the stage, Kristi, where I went, well, if I have to be the messenger, then I'm the messenger, because I'm so tired of keeping quiet. So, yeah.
I'm with you in that mission, because that was the number one thing that I saw, and people don't want to hear it. They're scared of the idea that you can't trust your family, and that because we've got this perception that family blood's thicker than water, and blood has hurt most people, and including myself, more than water ever did. So, there's this perception that we need to trust our family. You can't let your family down. All of this stuff. I'm going to 100% agree with you and just say, listen, family can do more harm than anyone else can in your whole life. We can, if someone outside, a stranger, hurts us, well, it's just a stranger. But when your family hurts you, it hurts you in so many more ways than anyone else can do it. Yeah. And we've got this, I'm all for doing whatever you need to do to keep your sanity and your peace. And whether that's letting go, like releasing relationships, telling people that you don't want to see them anymore, allowing yourself, because at the end of the day, we only have our health and our mental health, and whatever's going to protect that is going to, we need to do it. Because, and you've probably seen some of these studies, but you might not have, the University of, which university was it? I can see their logo. One of the universities last year came up with and I'll put it, Swanbourne University. I knew it was started with an S. Swanbourne University released a study that showed that victims of child sexual abuse are 8 times more likely to die in middle age than people without child sexual abuse. And they're more, I think it was 5.3 times more likely to die of cancer or heart disease, any kind of cardiovascular diseases. And then there were 12.9 times more likely to die from mental health illness, which self-harm and suicide. So, not only does child sexual abuse affect you as a child, it affects your whole life for the rest of your life. And it doesn't, yes, you listened to the podcast where I said, do you ever really heal? You might find some peace in that moment, but it's a large toll and cost to the body. And what we're seeing now is, we know that more than 1 in 4 Australian adults have been sexually abused as children. They go on to have their own families, and when we have repressed traumas, and we don't deal with things and we don't talk about it, we don't get it out of our bodies, then it's going to bleed onto the people around us. So we're passing on generational trauma by not dealing with it when we could talk about it. And so if our families are the ones doing this to us, and our families are the ones who are continuing the abuse by not protecting us, then we need to let them go, because if they're meant. And I like to talk about, and in my own stuff, I like to talk about safe versus unsafe. Safe adults protect kids. They don't harm them. They listen, and they create boundaries. They listen to children's boundaries. They listen to them when they say no, they stop. They don't make people feel uncomfortable. They don't say inappropriate things. They don't do all of these things. That's what safe people do.
Yes. Yeah.
And that's the thing. Like, if we could, with all of our knowledge and all of our information that we've got, all we want is for you to have safe relationships and safe families, so that your kids can be protected and safe in the long run.
Absolutely. And just what you were talking about before, Dr. Phil, he's helped me. Like, he's explained things in his TV shows that made me realize that I didn't participate willingly and all that sort of stuff. But one of the things he said to a woman and her daughter who'd both been abused by the stepfather, so the stepfather and then the step-grandfather for the grandchild, he said, you'll never truly get over what you went through, but the biggest thing you have to do is make sure that you don't let them control you from afar. And taking your power back, speaking about what you went through, not hiding it. It's like, I used to think this is my secret, but I realized it's not. It's my story, and stories are for telling, and stories can save lives. And that's what I wrote on my Braveheart survivor story. That's the first time I wrote and spoke about, this type of thing. But people always say blood is thicker than water, but, as I say in my book, that blood can turn toxic too, blood can turn septic. And we just, have to realize that our health, mental and physical, and I've had all these things that, you mentioned. I've had heart problems. I've got autoimmune problems. My body kind of has always got something going on health-wise, and I'm struggling with some stuff at the moment, but I've had a tumor, and luckily I also had a huge cyst on my ovary at the same time, which is what I went to the emergency department for this pain. And while they were doing the ultrasound and CT, they found my appendix was 3 times the size that it should have been. And I had what's called a mucosal tumor in my appendix. And luckily it was benign, but I was straight into hospital 2 days later having all these things removed. And I know that my nervous system is just so, like, even now I'm starting to shake in my voice, and that's one of my trauma responses. So I hope you can't hear it. But, there's just so many ways that, if we're not drinking ourselves to death, or, taking drugs or whatever. And I do speak also about, I have to exercise. I have to get that nervous anxious anxiety out of my body each day. I have to do meditation, which is so beneficial to people in my situation. You have to slow your breathing because we're all on this heightened, response all the time. And that's what we were with as children. We're wondering or waiting for that next time this person did this to us or came in our room at night or took advantage of us or the next time we were bullied at school or whatever it was that we were just heightened and oversensitized to.
Yeah, so true. And I tend to, like, because I grew up in quite a stressful family situation, I tend to feel like when there's not a lot happening and when everything is calm and peaceful, like I start questioning my life choices and that it's boring and what's going on with, like, I'm used to having this higher level of stress in my life. And if it's not stressful, everything's wrong. It's boring. I start picking fights with my husband, with my daughter, it's only in the recent years that I've started realizing that's what I do when my life is calm. I start creating problems. And so it's crazy how our nervous system, and it's something that we haven't done enough research and talk about, and we're now starting to understand. But you're right, you need to meditate, you need to do exercise, you need to get out in fresh air, you need to ground yourself down and make it lay on some grass, or if it's not too cold, or put your feet in the dirt, or go camping or walk your dog or whatever, because it's really important for our nervous systems to have to slow down a little bit.
Quickly interrupting this episode to let you know that Kristi has a whole library full of resources to support you. If this podcast hits home for you and you want to learn more about cyber safety, abuse awareness and prevention, and how you can protect your children, head to the link in the show notes where you can access free downloads, informative guides, and courses relating to these topics. You can also order Kristi's book, Operation KidSafe, A Detective's Guide to Child Abuse Prevention. If you want to join the fight against child sexual abuse, you can support Kristi to reach a wider audience by leaving a review on this podcast or sharing it with your community.
Yeah. So Deb, tell me, you've written this amazing book called Circling the Wagons. You're talking openly and honestly about intrafamilial abuse. So what kind of, because I get a lot of people mostly through TikTok, funny enough, because I speak over on TikTok about this stuff. I get a lot of people tell me that their families have not, so they've tried to tell someone as a child and no one listened. Their parents told them, same situation as you, told them, or someone's told them not to say anything. They're lying. They've and taken, and I love how you explain protecting the secret. Because I get a lot of questions from people saying, why do people do that? Why do people take that, tell you you're lying, justify it, minimize it, and then you've got to keep a secret, and it does all that damage. And I think you've hit the nail on the head. They're protecting the secret because of the shame. Yeah. And then in protecting the secret, they're protecting the perpetrator.
Yeah. And what I found also through my lived experience and knowledge and just working through all this stuff and just examining everything basically is that the women are usually the ones. So it's usually the perpetrators generally are the men. The women are the ones who are the bystanders or supposed protectors. They're the ones who silence us and generally, enable it. They can't deal with the position they're in. And potentially they've had the same thing happen to them as a girl. And potentially because the decades before us, we brush it under the rug, we don't talk about this, men can't control themselves, just, this happens, doctors and nurses, whatever excuse, these past generations have given their daughters, they've been silenced too. So they've just passed that silencing on to the next generation. And I can't say for sure whether that's happened to my supposed protector, but they have a lot of, reactions and things that make me think. And I have spoken to them and they've denied it. And that's all I can do. And I did try to relate to them in some way if they had something happen.
Try to understand.
Try to understand and say, well, why are you coming at it from this point of view? Why do you never want to listen to it? Why did you never hold them accountable? Why didn't you punish them? you know, because not doing that, and it's not just me, I found 2 other people who they abused as well, you know, so, and that's why I mentioned before that if my dad hadn't known, things
would have stopped, would have been
differently. Yeah. And if this person had watched what was going on in their own home and checked in with me, and even just recently, they victim shamed me by saying to me, why didn't you tell me the abuse was continuing? When, you know,
why would I when you didn't listen at the time?
You did nothing. You showed me it wasn't significant. It was hard enough to speak up the first time.
Yeah.
And this is me growing up as a child, not knowing what was right and wrong.
It's not my fault. It's never a child's fault. And that's the thing, like, in order for them to be able to sleep comfortably at night, they have to put the blame onto someone else, and they put them back onto you. And why, like, and we actually connected initially over my post about the, you know, if a child doesn't feel safe, they won't disclose. And in that post, I was saying that, you know, I listed a lot of reasons, and you said, yeah, and you only will, you know, if you manage to find your voice, if you you only have one shot, because if you manage to find your voice and the person doesn't have the right response, then you don't open your voice, you don't say it again. You're not going to tell anyone, because no one did anything the first time. So why would you?
Exactly. What's the point? And there's certain people that I want to help with my book and my advocacy, and one of them is teenagers. And mostly because I was very isolated as a teenager. You know, obviously through primary school and stuff was happening to me into my teenage years as well. But because the one person who I was willing to speak to and able to speak to didn't protect me or help me, there was nobody else. And one of my friends that I connected with, who I went to school with, and we just connected 30 years after, and a lot of questions that people ask me become my next blog. And she said to me, why didn't you tell me when we were kids or when we were teenagers? And I said, oh my God, no way. I didn't want anyone to know. I wouldn't willingly have spoken about it to anybody.
Or the shame, the humiliation,
the shame, the guilt that obviously isn't ours, but we feel, we take that on, and we all need to pass that back to the person who, you know, who deserves to have it, which is our abusers. They're the ones who should be shameful and guilty. We, as children, we didn't have the emotional or intellectual capacity to give consent. And I know you speak a lot about consent, and I think it's fantastic how you brought your daughter up with the consent. And I wish I had known to bring my daughter up with, I don't give consent as well. But we didn't have that ability to give consent either way. And a lot of us feel like because we didn't stop them, say no, thought it was a game, participated, that we were willing participants.
Never.
I've heard particularly a lot of adults who are the abusers will tell that person, but you enjoyed it, but you liked it. And I've got a whole chapter called Kaleidoscope, and it talks about how, you know, how things change in a kaleidoscope. Every time you move it around, patterns change. The patterns between when we were children and what we thought was happening to when we grow up and realize what really happened. And then we beat ourselves up because we were sexualized during our abuse. And I try, all throughout my book, I try and give examples so people, you know, particularly people who haven't had it happen to them, can understand a lot better. And I say to them, look, being sexualized as a child is like being tickled or having somebody draw on your back or your hairbrush. It opens up these senses in you. And you don't know as a kid that these senses shouldn't be opened, you know, or, you know, made to happen at that time in your life. So what I hear about people committing suicide because of this, and, you know, particularly men, particularly boys, because, you know, a lot of boys were highly sexualized because of their abuse. Them, you know, going back in their mind and thinking, well, I didn't stop this person, or I might have enjoyed it. And then as an adult,
trying to reconcile
beating themselves up, and then never getting to a point in their life where they finally realize that it's not your fault. And I talk about that. It is not your fault. And one of the biggest things in my book is, let's get this clear right from the start. You were not at fault. And as soon as you start taking that on, which a lot of us takes a lot of time to do, and education is key to working out why you weren't at fault. And this is how I've got to the place where I have, because I've continued to look into it, and I've continued to work out, as I said, whether it's Dr. Phil, psychologist, watching shows, just
reading, whatever.
Reading, going over my own situation and working out that was a lie, and that did not happen that way, because I have a really good memory, and that humiliation, those words that were said to me made me know that this person knew what they were doing when I didn't.
Yeah.
And I've also just recently, since I was on Braveheart's website, one of my friends that I went to high school with down in Sydney, she read my post, and even though I don't name my abuser, she guessed who it was, because she saw abuse happen when I was 14, and this person did it in front of her. I won't say what it was, but they did it in front of her, and she's like, what the hell is that? Because that stuff wasn't happening in her house. And apparently, like, I don't remember this particular bit, but I got really angry, embarrassed, and yelled at him. And then that makes me go, well, where was my supposed protector? Where were these people who were living in the same house as me if this person was still abusing me up until the age of 14 in a different way, and people were seeing it?
Yeah, well, your abuser was obviously very brazen in their abuse because they'd got away with it for so long, and that's the thing, they get brazen because they know that no one's going to speak up against them. And in fact,
it's like
go on, sorry.
I was going to say, it's like letting a serial killer off. They're just going to keep doing it. They know they can get away with it. They're enjoying what they're doing, and they think that, well, I'm not getting punished. So, and one of the things that and I'm doing participating in some research studies and stuff at the moment, which is trying to pass it forward, all the knowledge and stuff that happened to me from a lived experience, which a lot more people are taking on board.
They're listening finally. They're finally listening.
Yeah.
So you were talking about how your abuser was getting really brazen, and that you're doing lived experience research and stuff, and you're passing forward your story. But it's really important, I think, when the more we tell our stories, the less power they have over us. Yeah. The more we share, even when we feel shame, and when we feel embarrassment, and when we feel humiliation, the minute we share that and we don't, it loses power every time.
Yeah.
And it really does.
The more I've spoken up, the more I know how prevalent, this is everywhere. Whether it's been, me doing a Bravehearts Day in my local community where I raise money and put myself out there in my local paper saying I'm a survivor. I'm going to be there on this day if anyone wants to come and see me, or if you just want to learn about child abuse prevention, come on down. I've just spoken at Moreton Bay Says No to Violence, and I opened up the dialogue of intra-familial abuse being a form of domestic violence.
It is.
Well, it is. It's the home, and it's, abuse. So it's violence. But it's something that we don't talk about. And, I spoke in front of 500 people, including police and politicians, and it was really hard, but my confidence kicks in when I talk about this because I'm so passionate about it. And you'd never get me up there 5 years ago. I'd be like, God no. But I'm so passionate, but I'm also still that traumatized person who doubts herself, or when people don't, like, if I reach out to an organization and say, hey, I'm here, use me, I'm willing, and then they don't get back to me, that's really frustrating. And I know I'm only a little fish in a big pond, but I've got so much to contribute. And this is just the start of my journey. And
you can give back to this. You can give back where you didn't have that. You might change someone's life. You might change someone's experience. You might just give that mum or that dad or that family member who has a child in their care that they might not have given the right response to. You might give them the confidence to say, no, actually, this isn't okay. I'm going to go and do something about it. Because I'm sure I know. So, your experience sadly, your experience isn't, you're in a club you never asked to be in, really.
Yeah.
But your experience isn't you know, you're not the only one out there that has had this kind of experience. I'm sure what you'll find in your advocacy work is you'll find survivors with similar stories to yours, and they'll come out from everywhere once they hear you speak, and they'll be like, that happened to me, and this is what happened. And you know, and it's not fair. None of it is fair, but what we do with that, what we do with it is what we take the power back. When we talk about it, we take it back and we take it away from where it was.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just wrote a blog called Am I the Exception or the Rule? And I'm certainly not the exception. And with the fact of, you know, you've got statistics, but how accurate could those statistics be? Because nobody got my statistics when I was a little girl because it was covered up. And there's so many people who, as I said, talking about this stuff. Yeah, writing about it. My husband talks to people at job sites now because he's proud of what I'm doing. And they go, oh, yeah, I want to get that book because, or I want to get that book from my family member or my friend, you know. So it does make me just go, I already knew because of my close people near me that it had it happen to them. But it's just amazing how many people are out there. And looks, a lot of people are still not ready to deal with it. And I've come to realize that. Yeah, exactly.
That's their journey.
I think the more normal we make speaking about this, the more we share posts about this, although, you know, and even the trigger warnings, I struggle with that because I do know suicide, child abuse do need a trigger warning, but I feel like the people who need to educate themselves and hear about this stuff, not particularly suicide, but more child abuse, they're not looking at it because there's a trigger warning. So they're not learning and they're not getting that knowledge to realize, well, you know, as I said, all these things that we feel about ourselves and put on ourselves during our life, which we shouldn't, because there's a trigger warning. They're not going to look at it.
Well, yeah, some people in society or in communities that they don't want to hear about the bad stuff, so they'll just avoid all bad stuff, you know. And sadly,
head in the sand.
Those are the head in the sands, emus or whatever, ostriches. But you know, I think a lot more people are willing to listen and read and to hear this stuff now. I mean, when I started in my job and I was interviewing kids and I was talking about this stuff back then, a lot more parents and people were like, and I'm talking 13 years ago, a lot more people were like, oh, no, that can't be right. No. And they would be like, no, they were, you know, really dismissive of what I was trying to share. But once you know this stuff, you can't unknow it, and
I know
it changes your world. So I know a lot of people want to keep those blinkers on, but if they're listening to this podcast, they're not those people.
Yeah. I've also had people, like even the local chemists, say, you know, I'm selling my book at a few local places, bookstores, the newsagent, and they've looked at my name and gone, oh, Deb Aldrick, are you the one who wrote that book? It's at the newsagent. And I'm like, yeah. And they're like, can anyone read it? Or do you have to have had something happen to you? I said, no, I want everyone to educate themselves, to know what red flags to look out for, to see behaviors in adult survivors. And then, you know, I even wrote a blog just recently because somebody said to me when I told them what my book was about, which is also like, I go, you know, when I say what my book's about, I'm like, childhood trauma. And then if they're interested, I'll tell them a bit more. But somebody said to me, but you look so normal. And
well,
and look, she's very
abusers.
Very innocent and naive, and just a lovely, lovely person.
I know we need to change those stigmas and those.
But it did get me thinking, well, what should we look like? And, you know, and if say you're in a road rage situation, which a lot of child abuse survivors will have these overreactions to things, you know, whether it's hurt that somebody said to them, or whether it's, oh, this guy just cut in front of me, oh my God, I'm going to lose my shit.
Yeah.
You know, if you got out of the car and this person, say, had an A for abused on their forehead, how would you deal with them? Would you look at them and go, mate, I'm so sorry. Can we just work this out calmly? I'm so sorry what happened to you. Would we have a different reaction? Or that guy down the pub getting smashed every weekend, if you saw that A, if you went, oh, I understand now.
Yeah.
How can I help you?
I know, we don't know. We don't know when we're interacting.
No, but her saying that to me, it's just, as I said, all these questions or things people put to me make me go, oh, I'm going to write about that, because that is an important point and people need to understand these things. Most of my book was about things that I'd seen or, you know, whatever, just day-to-day things that I've gone, okay. And I've got 35 chapters in my book. They're quite small, and it's not a light read, but it's an easy read because, you know, I write it in very conversational tone that anybody can understand.
Well, that's a good segue to telling us about how people can get your book. So I know that you said, so Circling the Wagons. So where can they get it from?
So it is available. I've self-published. So there's a platform called Ingram Sparks, and what they do is you put your book in to them, you get it all made up, which I did. I did the cover, I picked everything on my book. I wanted it to look a certain way. And anyway, so Ingram Sparks then sells it to online retailers all over the world. People like
how
Amazon.
Do they just so they can get it on Amazon?
So Amazon, Booktopia, Angus and Robinson, Barnes and Noble. But one of the downfalls is these online retailers can sell it for whatever they want to make their extra profit. So what I've actually found recently, and I'm really quite annoyed about it, is it's on for over $45. And most people don't want to buy that. So what I've done is I've got my dragonflyadvocacy.com.au, which is my website.
Yep.
And I've now got an online store to sell it to anybody for $35 delivered in Australia.
Okay.
So if anybody's in whatever state in Australia, it's $35. There's no extra for delivery. And I don't make a lot of money on this book, but that's not what I did it for.
Yeah.
I cover my costs and a little tiny bit more, but I want this message to get out to people.
Yeah.
You know, people can buy it cheap as an ebook on Amazon. It's under $20, whatever Kindle, whatever they can read it on that. But one of the reasons I like people to have my paperback is because at the back, I've put about 5 or 6 lined blank pages. And why I did that is because when I was writing my book, I knew how hard I'd struggled to verbalize all of the, you know, issues and trauma and everything that I dealt with to my supposed protector all my life. Because we'd get into this conversation and they'd say something really ignorant or dismissive, and then I'd lose my shit and we'd get nowhere with it. Mm-hmm. So I put these lined pages at the end of my book so that if a survivor reads my book and wants to tell their story at the end of it, if they give it to their caregiver, their friend, family member, whoever it is, they can read my book and understand everything that they need to know about what somebody goes through. And then they can read the survivor's story at the end. So hopefully
that's amazing.
Yeah. So hopefully they're at a point in their life
ready
by the time they've read it to go, okay. And you know, that's why I like the paperback. If somebody wants to do that. Yeah.
That's so amazing, Deb. I'm really proud of you for everything that you've done, for sharing that in that. I'm really proud of you. I know that
thank you.
It's not an easy thing to do. It's not an easy thing to, first of all, admit what's happened or to share what's happened, but also to do something as powerful as write a book. I know it's not an easy journey because I wrote one too and self-published myself. And so I know how hard that is. And also that in every part of this process, you're considering how to help others. So
one of the things I wanted to ask you too, from your standpoint, and I've listened to about 8 episodes.
Oh, wow.
I've been listening. When you're in the police and dealing with all, you know, the child abuse stuff, did you have at times, did you know that something was going on in the family, but people didn't press charges?
Yes.
Or was it at
short
a stage
answer,
where
yes.
they had to?
Short answer is yes. There was many times when I interviewed children where I was sure that there was something going on, but it's not about pressing charges as much as, I think maybe I have to do a podcast on how child abuse investigations happen and what the process is, because a lot of people don't realize, unless there's physical evidence or unless there's evidence that like a video or something of the abuse, the child has to say something, otherwise nothing. We can't, the police cannot go off of hunches or feelings, right? So they need evidence, and the evidence, in the first case, the evidence is a child saying, this person did this to me. And if a child doesn't speak up, which is very likely, even if police had intervened at your age, you know, at some stage in your childhood, because of the fact that no one was protecting you or no one gave you that support, you might not have even said anything because you would have been trying to keep it the peace. So But in saying that, you know, once the child says something, then obviously the investigation starts. Until the child says something, nothing happens. So when I was putting that post on LinkedIn, it was like, you do realize that children literally only have one chance with police. And then, you know, mind you, I've had kids come back and I interviewed children multiple times. Usually I would say, because I would do protective behaviors and body safety with them afterwards, their situations changed, so their safety changed, and then they would say to their carer or their caregiver, I want to tell them about it now. And so then they would come back and then we'd do the interview again. And I have done that more than once. But in most cases, if the child doesn't speak up, I would get hunches and feelings, especially, and then it would break my heart.
I just wondered whether some of the mothers or the women didn't want it to go any further too. So at times
they usually threw up. They usually threw up walls and made it hard to interview. And they usually you could tell when a child had been, especially because they're not allowed in the interview room with the child. So it's
right.
So I don't know if you know this. In Western Australia, this is how it happens. I'm not sure how it happens everywhere else, but the child is interviewed one-on-one with the interviewer. It's recorded, video recorded. There's the parent or the caregiver sits out in the waiting room, and the child is allowed to have breaks whenever they want to, and then they'll come out and talk to the mum or the dad or whoever's there with the child at the time. But you could tell when parents were trying to control their children.
Yeah. Somebody getting a bit antsy out in the waiting room or whatever.
How long is it going to be? How long is it going to be? What have they said? Yeah. Did they say anything? You know, or they would be like, oh, you know, I've got lots to do today. Like they would be really dismissive of the process, and
it's just terrible, isn't it? Like
that should be really terrible.
Most important person, and you know, I was over the top, if anything, with my kids, you know, sleepovers, friends, who their parents were, who their step parents were, who their, you know, friends' older brothers or siblings were, you know, and it does.
And that's okay. And you're allowed to be.
Yeah. You should be. But I speak about too that, you know, that might have changed my kids in a way, you know, because this stuff just flows on down, whether it, in whichever way it flows down, it's going to flow down. And, you know, sometimes, and I've heard this more recently, which just distresses me, but some parents feel that, well, I didn't get protected, why should I protect my child? And that is the most unheard of thing that I know. And my psychologist told me that.
That's a traumatic answer if I ever heard it.
Yeah.
They're like literally blaming their children for them.
And then that continues on. And I speak about all the impacts health-wise, you know, the health system, the mental health system, the government payments for all these people, you know, whether they're homeless, whether they're, you know, their addictions.
And no one asks for it. When it comes down to it, no one asks for this.
No. And, you know, one person's choice to abuse a child has such huge ramifications, lifelong ramifications, and generational ramifications. You know, it just flows on. And, you know,
I think though, from my perspective, like, and I talk about this with my own one of my parents, you know, like, and it's my mum, so I'm happy to tell her. I've talked about this with my mum because I didn't grow up with my mum, I grew up with my dad, but I grew up with my dad because my mum had so much generational trauma from her own childhood that she wasn't able to parent, right? But my dad, he although he had trauma, he was older and he, you know, suppressed it all, so he was able to function and stuff like that. But my mum, I've talked to her, and you know, we talk about, you know, stopping generational trauma, and it stops with me. It stops with us.
Yeah.
Like she didn't stop it. I think from her perspective, she sees it as, we talk about it and I say, it stops with me. My daughter is not going to be affected by this trauma. Unfortunately, we can't always do that because we do put traumas on our kids. It's not, I think
it's kind of safety. It's not safety we try to put on our kids, you know, it's all those, hey, and I heard, you know, you speaking about how your daughter now tells other people, or people come to your daughter for resources when they need it. And that's fantastic. And, you know, and that's, you know, what I hope for other people who speak up, that, and for myself, you know, I have had people come to me and tell me about a terrible situation that they're now stuck in, that they had no idea, and they don't know how to deal with this whole family dynamic anymore. And how do I still see this person when they're protecting this other person who did something to my child, although I've lived my whole life with them? And that's the, you know, I'd like to say,
I think a lot of people, it's fucked.
The mind fuck. Yeah, thank you. It's how we all are. Yeah.
It's a mind fuck. But you know, at the end of the day, I think a lot of people struggle because when you cut out family or you leave a loved one because they've protected someone, or they're the one abusing, or, you know, whatever reason, it's going to create change, and change is hard. And it's going to create for everyone. So it's going to be
when
hard.
You've got no self-esteem, and I've actually tried to help someone really close to me about a year ago. I tried to get them away from their abuser and their bystander, and they ended up turning against me because they couldn't deal with the situation they were in. And I've got a chapter about it called Stand By Me, and I tell people what you should be doing for these people. But the fact that she was so heavily trauma bonded to her bystander, so mentally ill because of her abuse, and this is a person who's not young, and the thought of leaving was so much more distressing to them than staying in the hell that they live in every day. It's trauma.
Well, the hell they live in every day is what they know. The unknown is leaving and going somewhere else and doing something else. And the unknown is scary for a lot of people. It's why they don't change their circumstances. There's so much psychology. No one could it's so much to unpack. But I really have loved our chat, and I really love your book and everything that you've shared about it. So just share that website again. It's dragonflyadvocacy.com.au.
Yeah, you have to put the AU on it because there's another one that's not AU. So dragonflyadvocacy.com.au. It's a free resource for people to look at my blogs. As I said, teenagers, people who probably don't have the resources, they can buy an ebook and nobody will know about it. But I keep putting these blogs on, whether they're poems that I've written or whatever, but particularly things that teach you a lesson about something, about, you know.
They sound amazing.
When I was a little girl, I didn't want to be seen. I didn't want to have any attention drawn to me, stuff like that. But the books for sale on there, and I'll send it straight out to anybody who wants. I've just ordered some extra copies in as well. So
and I'll put all of those links in the show notes. I'll put all of the links in the show notes so people can find you, and it will be direct link.
And they can contact me they can look at the site anonymously, but they can also contact me. And there's a whole lot of links to different, like Bravehearts, 1-800-RESPECT, all the support services are on there that they might need to click on. So, and I just, after I wrote the book, I just thought, well, how am I going to get people if they want to get in touch? So that's how, perfect. And it sounds like the book would be the perfect book for anyone trying to understand not only themselves, if they've been through a similar experience or an experience like that, or for someone who's supporting someone who has been through that experience. So it sounds like the perfect book, and there's so much you can learn from Deb. And wow, we've nearly been talking. We've been talking over an hour, so we better wrap it up. No, I get you can have conversations like this, and it can just keep going, and we could be here all day. And I love that we have these conversations because we're both very passionate, and it's such an important conversation. So, and now, Deb, they can find you on LinkedIn if they need to find you. Have you got any other social media if they need to? I've got Dragonfly Advocacy on Facebook. There's a page and a group there. I think it's Dragonfly Advocacy 3, the number 3 on Instagram.
I'll put them on the show notes. But you're on Facebook and Instagram.
And Instagram, and I think you can click on all those links from my website. I'm pretty sure that they're all down the bottom of that. So if anybody wants to connect, absolutely. And I just wanted to say thank you so much for this platform. Thank you for letting me come on today. Because
you're welcome.
It's it's so nice to have somebody, you saying you're proud of me. It just, really, it's really nice because I haven't had a lot of that. So,
I am proud of you.
Connecting with people, and I'm proud of you for doing what you're doing because, we're both,
thank you.
Along the same path to help other people and educate them and stop this crap from continuing, basically. Let's be the generation that stops all of this. Let's be the generation that stops our kids from having to deal with this, and let's be the generation that stands up and protects kids. I agree, absolutely.
Thanks, Deb. Have a good rest of your day.
Okay, thank you. See you later.
Thank you for listening to this podcast episode. Education empowers children and empowers parents, and education prevents abuse. That is why I'm here, and that is why you are here. So thank you. If you want any further information or support, follow me on social media, either under Kristi McVie or Cape AU social media accounts. I'll put the links in the show notes. You can also purchase a signed copy of my book, Operation Kid Safe, via the website at www.cape-au.com. Also on my website is a free ebook titled 10 Tips to Keep Your Kids Safe from Abuse, and self-paced courses for parents to help you in your journey of child abuse prevention. Don't forget to join our free Facebook group called Operation Kid Safe Parenting Group. Please see the show notes for any extra information, links and help should you be looking for extra support. Thank you once again for giving a shit about preventing child sexual abuse. See you next time.